welcome. We will see how it goes. And welcome, Stephanie Balon, MAAMFT, expressive arts therapist at Star Vista in northern San Mateo County. Welcome to the Filipino Garage, and we are actually on the Filipino beach. Thank you for joining. Um,
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I am honored and privileged to join you in your beach atmosphere.
This is a little learning process because you are actually the first one to be on a virtual little session. Because usually, right, I like having people in person and in the garage. But with coronavirus, it's a little not the safest thing to do. So this is the revival, and we're gonna test it out to see how a digital format can work. I've been kind of lightweight avoiding it because I've been saying you lose a little bit of the magic of being in person. But I also realized I think that was just like a little laziness excuse on my side to like not do the podcast, and also time to get to work.
Not lazy. It's not lazy. Come on now, we're in a pandemic.
Okay. Semi.
Give yourself some credit. Like
Aw,
we all
thank
just
you.
trying to survive, and yeah, you needed a break. And this is a good time to revive.
Okay. So for context, I specifically wanted to ask you to come on and share because last Thursday, the 26th, 27th,
7?
the 27th of August 2020, I was trying to think of some numerology thing. 2 plus 7, that's 1 after 8, and 8, 9, 2020 something, but I couldn't find any cool numerology thing. But the pivotal historical thing is that FMHI San Mateo County got funding for a social enterprise community center. And you are one of the co-chairs of FMHI San Mateo County along with Christy Morales Kumasawa. And I wanted to get a little background and a little update. Like, this is a big thing. Could you share a little bit about what just happened, specifically on the last state hearing?
Huge, like beyond words to describe what happened, because this was something that we have been waiting for, like it's not just a vision of just me and Christy, but a culmination of hella folks who really wanted to see this happen. And so as of August 27th, we were granted $2,625,000 through Mental Health Services Act innovation funds to develop a cultural arts and wellness center, and with a social enterprise model. So it's different from like a regular nonprofit, and I think that's part of the innovation, is like really trying to look at it from a sustainability standpoint. So yeah, we're super excited.
So the cool thing about it, all right, that I saw was there was a lot of community buy-in, right? We had hella folks speak up from youth. The vice mayor of Daly City was there, Jocelyn Manalo, council member Rod Daos Magbual was there. But this is also something that's been in the works for a long time, right? I kind of want to get that background, right? I only found out about this last year. In 2019, like around November is when I first met up with you and heard about the project, right? But I know this has been in the works for a while, right? Could you give me just a little background of FMHI, San Mateo County, and then how y'all started with this grant proposal and the project?
That's a good place to start. So the Filipino Mental Health Initiative of San Mateo County is actually operating under the Behavioral Health and Recovery Services department in the county. So Christy and I are contracted to, I guess you would say, lead the charge. And we are one of 9 initiatives. We're called the Health Equity Initiatives. And we are under the another tier called the Office of Diversity and Equity. And so, you're asking about the history. I mean, really what our initiatives are intended to do, we have like 3 main goals of decreasing cultural stigma, increasing access to culturally relevant and linguistically appropriate mental health quality services, and also just engaging our community in culturally responsive ways through education and non-traditional ways like open mics, like through the arts and such. So that those are our goals. And as far as history is concerned, I mean, see, that's a loaded question, and I when you say where did it start, I want to say like since 400 years ago. We're building upon our ancestors' legacies, and live, seen and unseen. And prior to even when the Filipino Mental Health Initiative was called Filipino Mental Health Initiative, right? There was a core group of folks who recognized that there were health disparities in our community, like 10, 15 years ago. Again, and so we just want to acknowledge that didn't just start 2 years ago. And if you want to know more of the history, I'm not the best at sharing the full scope of it, but I mean,
check out FMHI's website.
Yeah, that Kuya Chris created.
So I don't know if we were explicit in saying that the Social Enterprise Community Center is directly targeting Filipino, Filipina, Filipinx youth to provide mental health services for them. And the social enterprise, for folks who might not know, like the term, is basically where there's going to be a profit generating project within the community center, which is in this case a cafe, so that the project is not grant dependent, right? So that in the long run, there's going to be funding to provide those services, those mental health services, which we don't really have that many accessible mental health services here in Daly City for Filipino youth, like what you were saying, culturally relevant and responsive in that way, right? Could you, break it down a little bit? Like, why does it have to be Filipino, like culturally responsive? Like maybe for people who don't, think of it in that way, because we're kind of, you're kind of entrenched in the world of mental health, right? For the layman who doesn't really think about it that much, I know mental health has gotten its due attention in the last few years, right? More versus 10 years ago, right? But there's an additional lens that you're adding in terms of culturally responsible. What does that look like?
So I do just want to name that there are mental health agencies that exist that are trying to address our needs. It's not that there's nothing that exists, and we're partnering with them. So like the Daly City Youth Health Center, our second home, like Daly City Partnership, there's a lot of work that's been done in North San Mateo County, including Star Vista. So I just want to name that because I just don't want the folks to see that this is just the big, we're just starting something new when in fact we are just trying to bridge, what's working in a centralized hub. So just want to name that.
Okay, my bad. I just didn't know them. That's why. I guess that's my ignorance on that, right?
No, it's all good. It's just like, there's a lot of great work that's being done, not not only in mental health but in education, like
Mm-hmm.
with PEP. I mean, everybody knows the Skyline College. Like there's a lot going on, and this is kind of like a place where we can where all the minds meet.
Mm-hmm.
Is that's what we're hoping for.
Mm-hmm.
And so your question was about, like, for the layman, like what why is it important, right? Like,
Yes. And this
so
this lens of the culturally responsive, culturally relevant, or culturally
yeah,
specific
for
mental
sure.
health services.
Okay, so I mean, I'll break it down to even just like personal experience, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, growing up bicultural, I mean, just trying to be able to fit in, um, your community, and being like Panay and then American. You're like either not like brown enough, or you're not like white enough, and there's not a lot of spaces that help navigate that sense of a cultural identity. And so over the course of, I mean, I'd say in the last like 20 years, there's been so much research being done by Kevin Nadal, EJR David, about like the importance of knowing your roots, and how there's a strong correlation between cultural identity formation and wellness, like mental health and wellness. So like, Jose Rizal,
Mm.
the quote that comes to mind is, um,
No
no
history,
history, yeah,
no
right,
self. Mm-hmm.
and then no history, no self.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I think that boils down to that. Like, we are collectivist people, and to not know our narrative and the resiliency in that, and that's overshadowed by this dominant narrative that was imposed upon us through colonization. I mean, it does something to the psyche. And so we are, just again building off the folks that are already doing this work. This is not new. um, just trying to create a physical space where we can explore that, and with our youth, and more, and not just our youth, because I mean, it is the heart of the social enterprise is focused on the youth, of course. And it's, again, when you think about it from a collectivist lens, it's intergenerational, right? The importance of recognizing, your parents' immigrant story, like, our ancestors and such, and back 7 generations back, 7 generations forward.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think one aspect that this kind of reminds me about is the statistic that y'all have shared in presentations about the high suicidal ideation among young Filipinos, but especially high with young women, right? I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it was the highest rate among young Asian females, are Filipina women.
So it's one of the highest rates. I can't, I will not speak confidently in that, because again, there's not a lot of research, and that's why this center is important, because we can track some of that
Mm,
data.
mm,
Um, because a lot of what we've been trying to understand is, what is the need of our community, and there's not a lot of resources available, and especially, and when you think about Asians in general, right? Like, Filipinos have been lumped into this category of Asians,
mm-hmm,
and there's no disaggregated data, right, to show and accurately reflect the need of, like you mentioned, the Filipina youth,
mm,
right? So that's what we're trying to do. But to speak to your point about like the disparity, especially amongst our youth, there. So Daly City has the highest concentration of um, Filipinos in the mainland.
mm-hmm,
That trips me out, right?
mm-hmm.
Like, we're so highly concentrated, and we have some of the highest rates of depression and suicidal ideation, like you mentioned, but yet the lowest utilization rates.
Of
you
mental
know,
health services?
of mental health services. And so, what's happening there? Why? I mean,
What
I
are
could tell
the
you, like,
what
personally, what?
Okay,
Sorry, go
tell me,
ahead.
tell me. Tell
What?
me.
Oh, okay.
So you were
So,
born raised in Daly City.
yes.
Okay.
No, I was not born, but I was born in San Francisco,
Okay.
Kaiser, Geary.
Kaiser Geary.
And there's not a lot of native SFs here anymore. There's a lot of like implants. I mean, not hating on the implants, but or transplants. I said implants.
Not hating on the implants
Not
or
hating
the
on the implants.
transplants.
Hey, what you get me? So transplants. Yeah. So I was born in San Francisco, who was bred in Daly City, and I went through my own depression and anxiety as a youth. And the closest thing I had was in high school. I went to Sacred Heart Cathedral. I'm not trying to hate on my counselor. He sees this, but just
What's the
saying
name? What's the
that,
name? What's the name? Just kidding.
just saying, like, he was an older white male, who could not, we were not vibing at all. And I was almost like re-traumatized. Like he was telling me like, well, you just need to, the very more, coming from a more individualistic kind of perspective. And I'm like, that does not resonate. And so I didn't even seek services until like my mid 20s, and so I'm just saying that's not a unique story. Like that's part of like the data that reflects like, part of the reason why folks do not engage in westernized approaches of mental health is because it doesn't, like, you're not engaging with folks who look like you, who understand your culture. You're almost like back in this same power dynamic of like, all that. So
When they say low utilization rates, right? What are the things to utilize, right? What are those practices that they're saying, even if with the high rates of depression, suicide ideation, what are the services that they are measuring against that these communities are not using?
So these services defined are like evidence-based practices, such as like talk therapy, right? So what it would typically look like is that you go to a provider, or you make a phone call to request for support to access a clinician to talk about your issues. Who does that? Like, I mean, that's not that's not a very, it's like, I mean, like, if you didn't, you know what you don't know, like, how are you supposed to know how to navigate that, let alone a youth, to be able to access like the, culturally responsive resources. So,
And then you said, as FMHI, there's also a stigma that you're working against, right? What have you seen in terms of the stigma within the Filipino community?
I want to ask you that question.
No,
I know,
I'm
this is
asking.
like,
You're the one with the MFT, MA. What was yours again?
those
You're
are just
with the
letters.
MA and AMFT. There you go. What is
Okay.
that? What does that? Mama Awesome and Awesome Mama Filipino Teacher. That was a. Is that what?
I
Right?
like
That's
that. That sounds better. That makes more sense actually, because like I really don't know how to define like AMFT, MA, all that. But yeah.
I'm INFP. Is this MBTI personality? What if I just start putting that in my resume, right? Christian Guerrero, comma, INFP.
Yeah, don't people do that? I think that could be something though,
That could be something.
that could be something.
Yeah.
You're onto something, Kuya. So what's the question again?
Question is, what are ways I can boost my resume? No, the question
Well,
was, what did you see? What are you seeing in terms of the stigma that you're fighting against, right?
sure. Yeah.
Working within the mental health field, especially in context of the Filipino community and providing these culturally responsive and relevant services.
Yes. So I think the best way I can describe this is through like one of the youth I worked with at Delhi City Youth Health Center at Westmore. I mean, of course, I'm not going to name their name. Um, but it was a lot. I would see like this theme around a generational gap, like the inability to speak to their parents about their depression or their anxiety. Like it wasn't real, you know. And specifically for this youth, this Panay, she was 13, you know, so she's a freshman, and yeah, she just had recently immigrated from the Philippines and reuniting with her parents. So her parents came through earlier. You know, like it's a very typical story where you know the parents come to the States and you know try to establish you know a foundation, and then they will sponsor you know the rest of their family. And so she grew up with her Lola, and that's who she knew as her caregiver. She has an attachment to her, and then for her to all of a sudden in her one of the most transformative stages of her life, because the adolescent youth stage is a time where you're trying to understand your identity. You're relating to others. You're kind of detaching from your parents and like, you know, figuring out like how to be a free thinker, right? And so she was in that moment of transition of understanding that, and then going to live with her parents who she hadn't known for like almost a decade, and then reuniting with them and then trying to understand the language, you know, uprooted. She doesn't have her community, she doesn't have her Lola, you know, and now she's just trying to get to know her parents. And so with that comes a lot of stress and anxiety and depression, and like going to this new high school where it's like, you know, primary language or is English and such, right? She doesn't have community there. And so she sought out services through the wellness counseling center at the high school. And a lot of it was like this misalignment of the definition of struggle, you know. And when we talk about cultural stigma, it's like, you know, from her parents' point of view, it's like, you know, well, this is what I had to do in order to come to the States, and you know, you should be thankful, you know, for all that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's just like it's about like you know, and then you don't talk about your feelings either, right? Historically, you just do not. You know, who talks about like their emotions in during a family dinner?
So, what have you seen to be helpful in bridging those intergenerational gaps within the context of like Filipino culture?
Dialogue, like really providing opportunities for the youth and the parents to have a safe space to really speak to their stories. You know, it's just like it's like kwentuhan, you know, like storytelling, like just really being curious about, you know, so what was it like, you know, coming here to the States, or, you know, for the parents to be like open to hear, like, my struggle is different from yours. This is what I'm experiencing here in the States, you know. And it again, it's not a one size fits all I just want to name that. Like it doesn't always look like that, but just creating more non-traditional spaces where we can just talk about mental health in general.
Have you seen examples of that already? Have y'all been able to
Oh yeah.
facilitate those? Yeah.
Oh yeah. So we had a community health forum where um, it was back 2012, and it was cross generational, and there were folks that were speaking, like providers, and actually I was one of the people that spoke from lived experience, so not from the AMFT, AMMA, whatever. I actually spoke to my depression and what it would be like to be seen by my parents, and to recognize that this was real for me, and then I had not just me, but there's other folks, like other people coming forward, like parents, adults who were like, wow, my niece or my nephew's going through this, and there was just a recognition of like that this is a real thing. We need more of this. Yeah. And then in addition, we had like an open mic. We've had quite a few open mics, but like through Phil's Coffee, like we
In Westboro,
in Westboro, yeah,
the
and
spot that has taken so much of my money. Yes.
Phil's Coffee, yeah, and that was well received. Again, not just by the youth, but like the elders. There were folks there that just were really wanting to listen and understand. So it's just creating those spaces.
So I would guess that those experiences lead into somewhat of the vision that FMHI has for the space, for the Social Enterprise Community Center, right? Like, could you give me a little rundown on what that vision looks like for this project, where it's at right now, but what the vision y'all are working towards?
Right. So the way that it's been framed, that it's focused, like I said, on the youth, and the heart of it is the youth. But again, we want to frame it as if it's an intergenerational space. And so if you think about, I'm going to give an example, like the Bayanihan Community Center in San Francisco. Beautiful example of, how they're doing it there. We want to replicate something like that here in Daly City or North San Mateo County, where, there are classes provided for all ages, and so that's part of it. So I just want to name that too, because I think when we talked about what the center could look like, it was mainly youth focused. But the heart of this programming is called School to Career Programming. So it's like on the job training for youth to be able to access resources in career development, entrepreneurship, skill building, financial wellness, rite of passage, like understanding your history, and mental health and physical wellness. So it's like addressing all parts of the youth and in one space. And we're leaning on the business leaders in the community that have already established themselves here in North San Mateo County, that are Filipina, Filipino, Filipinx. So that's the difference, I think, like with how other programs have been structured, is that we're really trying to engage our community, and not just education, but in terms of entrepreneurship.
I like that school to career pipeline that you just said. right? I think there's a little, we're lacking a little bit of that where sometimes it's, I'll just name it, predetermined careers, stereotypical, that's pushed onto Filipino youth. Not that it's bad, but a lot of, even my mom wanted me to be a nurse, right? And this is kind of allowing space for other options, right? Like you were talking about entrepreneurship skills. Why was this social enterprise framework something that was something that y'all kind of pursued? Like, where did that start off? Where's the inspiration behind that?
So I'd say it's just, well, my background is in nonprofit. I'm dating myself, so like 20 years nonprofit, and
Hey,
seeing.
during quarantine, I'm also dating myself. Oh my. Ah, ah,
Okay, okay, different kind
okay.
of dating, but that's not the kind of dating I'm talking about. But yeah, so like, it's been years of like just seeing, like witnessing, this scarcity mindset of funding. You're constantly chasing the dollar, and trying to write grants and all that. And I thought there's anything wrong with that. I mean, if you have a strong team that can do that, then great. If you have the infrastructure to do it, then awesome. But I've oftentimes seen that really strong programming has not been sustainable, because there's a reliability on one source of funding, one or two sources of funding. And so we're trying to think about, okay, how do we diversify the funding streams? While we can't chase, state government, city funding all the time, there's not dedicated funds. What better way to do that if it's like, the community can invest $1 back into operating funds. So, I mean, it's been done. I mean, you look at Delancey Street Foundation in the city, Old School Cafe. I mean, this is not new. They say it's innovative, but really, we're just like
Building on.
we're inspired by like what's been done already, but there's just not something specific to our community.
How did you get into community organizing and nonprofits? If we're going to bring it down a little bit to that personal level, what's the background there? You said you've been active for like 20 years. Has it been in Daly City area? Have you moved around? Like, where did that start?
Ay, nako. That's- Do we have time?
We
Like, how
have
long is this
time. We
podcast?
have time. Let's dive deep.
Oh, goodness. So community organizing. I mean, I think it goes back like way. I'm thinking about like, when my mom, like at 6 years old, we would be doing like food drives. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it dates back like as long as that. Like, I
Hmm.
think I've been inspired by my parents, my sister, my brother, who have been super dedicated to community. I mean, how do you define community organizing anyway?
Or at least this work, because I just want to kind of get a snapshot of like a wider view.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I talk to people who are already in the field or in the depths of their career, like you said, over decades of work, right? Sometimes it's a little bit hard to see the where it started, and I'm very interested in that, right? Because I talk to different people in different careers, different fields,
Mm-hmm.
and they've
Mm-hmm.
already spent years in there, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's cool to see, and it's inspiring to see, though also I think it's also inspiring to see where it grew from, right? For
Mm-hmm.
younger people who might be in similar spaces, exposed to similar things, they might not immediately see themselves in like 20 years from now, right? But
Right.
what were the beginning inklings and that entrance into that world of this world of service? You're in a
Okay.
service
Yeah. Yeah.
career, right?
Right. Yeah. So in my past life, or prior to entering the mental health field, I was actually in transitional housing. So I was in, I won't name the name, a nonprofit that offered transitional housing for family individuals and families, and I was the director of like a 24 unit, actually different units, apartment units, but offering like at least 4 to 6 months of housing to help folks jump back into their own space, because San Mateo County has the highest standard of living, right? I just want to name that. And like there's a lot
Higher than San Francisco?
well, it was back then, like 10
Um,
years ago. So I don't know, it might be, I haven't looked at the statistics lately, but back then when I was working with this agency, we had a lot of first time homeless folks. And that's really where my survey, I mean, where I was starting to begin to think about, like, where do I want to devote my service to? And I started recognizing that because I was in middle management, I was a director of housing, and I was amongst, primarily middle-aged white men. And as you know, like folks who are low income are communities of color. And I just was seeing, like, I don't know if I was tokenized or what, but I was the only like woman, young woman of color in management, and just seeing like this was like kind of like a microcosm of systemic oppression. Just gonna name that. Like there was a lot of inequity that was happening, and I was trying to think about ways, how do we bring in more cultural awareness, inclusivity, and such. And so yeah, I called on my brother, who was, he that was his craft, or that was his gift. But we contracted him to come through, and then like through one of his sessions to talk about diversity and cultural awareness, I realized that I was a minority in this thought, and I didn't feel a part of it. It just wasn't aligning with me anymore. And then an opportunity came up where there was what's it called? It was through Compass Point. It was called Next Generation Leaders of Color. It was an institute, a year-long programming where it was a cohort where folks within the folks of color in the health and human services area came together and were able to access like individual coaching, like peer coaching, education. And that's where I learned about like systemic oppression and like having a language around these health inequities.
was this a program? Was this a fellowship kind of?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, there was something through the agency that I was working with where they said, "Hey, would you be interested in this? Like, is this something, because I would get I guess based on the size of the agency, there was a stipend a sliding scale, and it was worth like $13,000, but they were able to get it for $1,000, So I was like, yeah, well, I'll do it. Like, why not, right? More skills, awesome. I didn't know what to expect, and that's when I think that was like the turning point for me to get into this field, because in that space, I was amongst folks that looked like me or had similar stories working within this system. And like the racial injustices and inequities, like through health. So that's where I pretty much had my career coaching to get out of that space into mental health.
Was this already after you had done your grad program? You're already
No, that was part of the plan. So I had not even considered going back to grad school until this program.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where did you do your undergrad and what did you do?
Oh, so I went to the University of Washington and I majored in sociology.
Damn, you
Yeah.
went all the way up there from Daly
hmm
City. You bounced.
I had
You,
to. I wanted to be, I was like, that was far enough from like all, like being with my parents, yeah. So,
so your experience within that transitional housing spot, like realizing kind of the momentum of a lack of diversity, once you realize that, made you want to shift into more of a mental health career?
good question, right? Because I didn't clarify how I even got into mental health. So, what I was seeing in transitional housing, working with homeless families and individuals, was that there was a high rate of recidivism, right? Like people
Mm-hmm.
were cycling back into our programming. And I'm like, what is happening here? Are we really addressing the issue? And to me, intuitively, I was like, and I'm sure like other folks felt this too, but it was like around mental health. Like, are they being offered quality mental health services to address, family dynamics or, their depression and anxiety, being homeless, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And it wasn't until one of this is oh my god, what's her name? Lori Rappaport, one of my mentors, like partners with Notre Dame University. She is an expressive art therapist. I didn't even know that existed. That's the thing. Like I had this passion of uh, being in the arts and community service and wellness and all that, but I didn't realize there was a field that merged all the things.
Mm.
And she was the first one to help me realize, like, oh yeah, like that's a field. And so I partnered with her to support the families who live there because we had what's called it was an organic garden, right, in Menlo Park, and there was not I mean there was not much life there. I mean, there's no arts or anything, nothing to really engage the families to be in that space. And so we thought of this idea, it's called like a stepping stone project, where the families would come together and create stepping stones that reflected their journey being in this space. So it's like they have like some sense of proprietorship, like they ownership over this space where they can put their stamp, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that they would leave there to inspire other families that are coming through. So just to create more art. So it was like an art installation, community art installation project that opened up all these doors of like, okay, well, what else can we do to leverage the arts for healing? Because that was like one of the most successful events in my um, time there at the shelter, was to see like these families coming together and spending quality time with their kids and creating like these stepping stones and you know anyway, so that's
So that's how you got into the field of creative arts therapy.
hmm
And then that's why you went back to get your for grad school with that vision of, hey, let me connect creative arts with community service.
yes and yes. So I see
There's
the
something else.
like
There's something else. Yes. Yes,
yeah
and
so there sorry, I'm just thinking about really when this vision of leveraging the arts and the center idea and such and moving into mental health came from a dream
Mm. Mm.
when I was 19 years old.
19?
Yeah.
Were you working at that shelter already?
No,
No?
this is like in college.
Okay,
So,
okay, okay.
so because I don't want to claim this whole vision as my own, but like I mean, the reason why I've stuck with it is based on
The
literally a
dream.
dream.
Okay, tell me
A
the
dream.
dream. Tell me the dream.
So 19 years old, I had this like vivid, visceral like dream. I mean, I really embodied, like, I felt like, oh my gosh, this is something I need to write down when I wake up. And so it was like 4 a.m. in the morning. And, you know, like, this was Saturday too, right? Because
You
19 years old.
remember?
Yeah.
Damn.
No, because I was thinking, like, oh, you know, maybe I should be drinking or something. I don't know, like, you know, like college life, you know, at Saturday, like, why am I waking up at 4 a.m.? And like, I remember like wanting to document what I saw in this dream and what I felt. And I took one of these brown paper bags that held I don't forget what they're called. When you take the tests, I don't know if you did that because you're a younger generation.
The test.
The form
Scantron?
Scantron.
I'm not
You
that
did-
young.
I
Oh
know,
my
but
god, I know Scantrons.
but they still
I
still
don't
do
think
that?
they use that anymore. I don't
No, no,
know.
okay. Okay,
Everything's probably digital now, but I've
yeah,
done my
everything's digital.
Scantrons.
Okay, sorry. I don't
I've even was inputted the answers into the Scantron machine while I was helping doing teaching stuff.
Okay. So
Okay,
you know
okay.
Scantron.
But it's not brown.
No, the brown paper bag, like you would get buy Scantrons and you would I mean
Put
like
it
they
into
would
yeah.
the university bookstore or whatever. So
They still have brown paper bags
back
now.
then.
Okay.
Well, okay, they still have brown paper. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not in the university, so I don't know if they just give them like the Scantron. Anyway, the point is, it's the paper bag that I had next to my bed, and I took a pen and I drew out what I saw, and it was like this. It was this cafe. I mean, it was like walking into this cafe that was powered by the youth, and you could see on the walls like artwork, and there was an open mic in the corner, and you know, clear like circle tabletops with glass tabletops with like jewelry and other arts and crafts that were for sale. You know, like this is something like that the youth created that was on display, you know, to talk about their identity and such. And then you know, people would come into the cafe and they sit down at one of these glass tabletops, and you know, they look down and they see like, you know, this necklace or something, and they're like, oh, you know, this, wow, you know, let's, you know, it's just like you feel good about investing $1 when you go into this space. You know that it's going back into community, and there's like just this circularity of things. And to me, I mean, back then I didn't know that meant sustainability, but that's what it felt like. You know, that you know, the consumer can walk in. You know, they're purchasing their coffee, they want to buy, you know, the artwork made by the youth that's helping to power the programming for the youth. That's 19 years old, right? So I'm 42. I'm 42. So that's like 2 decades ago, which they didn't even have the name for like social enterprising. I don't think back then, maybe.
What happened in the dream? Do you remember? Was there
Yeah.
anything that happened, or it's just walking through the cafe?
It's just walking through, like literally like sitting down on this glass tabletop. I remember seeing like earrings and necklaces and things that were created by the youth, and then like all the artwork, and in the background you could hear someone doing spoken word, and people gathering their coffee and all this stuff. And yeah.
At 2000. That's the year
2000?
2000-ish.
No, is it 2000?
20 or early 1998 probably
Yeah,
if you're 42, 1999, like that.
oh, you do the math. I'm not good at that.
That's the that. And were you doing spoken word in college?
I did not do spoken word, but poetry was definitely one of my forms of medicine for sure.
Yeah. Do you still have
Yeah.
that brown paper bag?
Shit. No, that's what I like. Amongst all my color, all the moving, like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wish I kept it. But I remember it. I can see it on the paper bag, and so then like, here's the thing. So that was the vision, and I felt like, oh my gosh, like this needs to happen, and I held on to that dream and had different iterations of that, like throughout my career, where I was like, okay, I'm gonna partner up with someone, and we're gonna start a cafe and a restaurant and all this stuff. And like, yeah, there were just so many
Different iterations
and
or
failures,
attempts. Yeah. Yeah.
attempts,
Mm,
like,
mm, mm.
you know. So
I think it's important to note those little failures or learning lessons
learning
from that,
lessons, yeah.
right? Of like the attempts, and we're at a point where we're seeing now, a manifestation of that little 19-year-old girl's dream, right? Well, that's interesting. I'm just thinking because we've talked off air about different dreams and stuff like that, right? And all the dreams I remember are me flying, or maybe I can one day fly. Maybe that's one of my things that I'm going to work towards, about flying. What do you think about
Do
that?
it. I mean, if you want to do it, like,
Just kidding.
I
No, but
mean,
I think it's interesting, like that you've been able to keep up with that kind of, the dream of that when you were young, right? Because sometimes it's easy to like have, at least for me, I'll speak for me. I'll have a vision of some, oh, I'm gonna build this, and then I'm gonna be manic about it for 2 months. Then later on, I'm like, okay, I don't really want to do that. Then I'll get another little, oh, I'm gonna build this, and then later on, I'm like, nah, I don't really want to. But you've been able to kind of continue working on this vision, right, throughout the years. I know when we talked, right, and you brought up your brother in when with that transition from the transitional housing, right? But could you share a little bit about his influence in this center and this vision, right?
oh yeah, for
Because I know
sure.
you've told me that it's been a big impact.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think if you were to ask me what kept that 19-year-old vision alive, um, is all rooted in faith and spirituality, but also like live people like my brother. He was an activist in his side of the nation. He's done a lot of work
He was in
with.
the East Coast.
He was on the East Coast, yeah. I mean, yeah, on the East Coast, but he worked throughout the states. Like people would contract him and stuff. But it was rooted in social justice and cultural awareness, diversity, and inclusivity. He was a facilitator, a consultant for like Forbes. What's I don't know, the company Forbes 500. What are they called?
Forbes, the magazine, or
Forbes.
the
Yeah,
one that makes the list, like
yeah,
the
Forbes
richest.
500. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So he did consulting for folks like that, like in terms of inclusivity and cultural awareness and such. And so he was on the other side of the country, and while we were on opposite ends, we were still doing this similar work. Like we were very aligned in our passions, and when I shared this dream with him, he didn't doubt it. He was like the first one to be like, this is not a pipe dream. Like, yeah, let's do this, like let's figure it out. And he was my accountability partner, I guess you would say, Um, every time we would talk on the phone or he would come back home, to visit, we'd have like late night talks about, so what are you envisioning? What's your next step and such. And so he was the one, I guess that you would say, that was the fire behind this. And sorry, I get emotional.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Because yeah, he passed away in 2013, and I think that was another moment that marked, like, yeah, we need to do this. And he's been guiding me ever since. So, yeah, I know. Yeah.
And so, thank you for sharing. I know he's like been a big part of your like journey and reflecting on this, right? Could you tell me like when the work for this specific funding source started, right?
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
I know it took a while to even just write the proposal, right? And when I read it, I was like, "Oh, dang, this is good." This shit was I've been part of different nonprofits and I've done grant writing and reading and assess, and I've never liked it, right? Because I like talking, right? And
Mhm.
but wh- and I'll just write for essays and things that that I'll do and I can do it. But then when it's time to write the grant, I'm like, oh, do we have a grant writer? Can someone do this? And when I read yours and the one submitted by FMH, I was like, damn, this shit is dope, right? And like shout
Thank you.
out, right? You wrote a letter of rec for me, right? For some of my applications. And then when I read it, I was telling you, I was like, damn, this shit is hella well written. I was like, who the fuck is this Christian Guerrero? I want to meet him. He sounds hella dope because you have a way with words and
Yeah.
combining both like community work, but writing to the way that people assess, right? Like understanding that there are these systems in place that sometimes have barriers of entry because of your technical skill in writing, right?
Right.
And then
Right. Mhm.
being able to write to that is super powerful, super important to have that, and you have that skill, right? And so, could you give me just a little overview of what the background in terms of when this specific iteration of that vision started and writing through that?
Oh, yeah, that was pretty exciting actually, because we didn't even know that this type of funding was available, right? So prior to even applying to all of this, we had already had a strategic planning retreat with FMHI. Like Christy and I, we introduced this whole idea about the social enterprise. And again, this is dating back like even, 10 years back, where we were doing another strategic planning and we were envisioning, oh, what would we like to have? What's the trajectory for FMHI and to have a center, right? And then fast forward, here we are, like, let's do this. And planned with, we were in the process of doing the stakeholder buy-in process in 2018. And the county, like I said, we're supported by the county, and they know like what we're working on. And Doris, the coordinator, our doula Doris,
Dula Doris, shout out.
shout out to her. She's like, hey, this might sound like up your alley, like aligned with what y'all are trying to work on with the center, because we had envisioned it to be like a 5-6 year process. But we initially wanted to make sure that there was a stakeholder buy-in process. So like having a needs assessment, focus groups, surveys and such to make sure. And then the blessings from our elders who are doing this work or have done it. And then it just was timing. she said, hey, this is coming up. This only comes up every 2 or 3 years. So if you're going to do it now. And I was like, shit, okay, let's just do it. Like, I was telling Chrissy, like, fuck, should we just like apply for it? And she's like, yeah. I submitted it and I was like, okay, fuck it. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Then, 3 months later, we find out that we were the top 5 projects, and that there was like actually no, you know, they weren't like criticizing it or anything. Like, they were just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, So that's how it started, and then that's how we came up with the Tribe Advisory Council. Like hella folks, like a core group of 8 to 10 that just dedicated themselves in the last 2 years to like see this move forward.
That makes me think about the importance of having advocates within the system, if we're gonna use like the term the system, right? But basically how Doris reached out and was saying, hey, this is very relevant, and knowing your work, right, to access institutional funding, right? And it does really make me think about the fact that maybe before, right, let's say a few decades back, you don't have these people in positions of to access power, right? This is capital power, right? To be able to even advocate for you or tell you, let you know, right? Hey, there's this opportunity, and that's a big thing. And to imagine that it boils down to an individual in some cases of reaching out and saying, hey, apply to this, right? And making that accessible for smaller communities or more specific advocacy groups like FMHI to access. I think that's super important. And so
Allies.
allies,
That's allyship.
yep. And
Allyship.
it makes me, kind of think back to your story about being in that other group where it's not that diverse in that transitional housing. People in the positions of power maybe don't have the context of understanding the lived experiences of even the people they're serving, because they're not from that demographic, they're not from that background. I think that circles back to what you were saying about there's a big difference with having a therapist that has a similar background as you, right? And I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful to see where this pans out, where the social enterprise community center can go in terms of delivering those services. Could you, in a mini transition, I asked you to share a little poem, because we've talked a little bit more on the project side so far, and I kind of like diving into the personal with the folks who share on the podcast. Would you like to share a little bit
Oh yeah.
of your poem?
Sure. For Kuya, anything.
Of course, we're on this nice beach. It's a good ambiance.
It's a good time. Yeah. So this poem was written actually on my return back from the Philippines right before the pandemic in February.
Why did you go to the Philippines?
Because my uncle, my dad's brother, passed away. And
Condolences.
yeah, thank you. And so just some background, like my dad is one of 10
Damn, siblings.
Yeah, my Lola, like, I was Panay. I'm like, damn, I got one. She got 10.
One.
Like,
Damn.
More power to you, Lola. Like,
Shit, 10.
shit, I know, right? 10. I'm like, even 3. But anyway, so yeah, one of 10, and my dad, was the one that assumed the role of fatherhood, like amongst his siblings. And so
Was he one of the older ones?
no, he was like, I think sorry, I don't know like exactly, but like third or fourth, eldest.
Yeah.
But he was manong, in their eyes. Like he was the one who helped take care of like all the siblings when his dad passed away. And so he immigrated like in 1970. Yeah, when my brother was born. Um, Around the civil rights, the end of the civil rights movement, and yeah, like was the only one out of the 10 to come to the States to send money back home. Again, not a unique story. And so he has been battling with like, I mean, he's 81 now and doesn't get to see his family as often, right? And
Was any
to
of his
not be,
siblings able to immigrate also?
no,
So he
no,
was the only one of the siblings to
only
immigrate all
one.
these years.
All these years, the only one. And so he's slowly seen throughout the years um, the passing of his sisters and brothers. And some he was not able to attend. And, he's 81. And so we thought like, and this is, he needed to be there, for my uncle, my tito, Percy. And my mom, she's immunocompromised and she's would not be able to travel, and so I went with him. And to support him, but also to just obviously pay my respects and see family. And so this poem is about this whole process of grieving and going through the rituals that are very different from the way we grieve here in the States. You have like days of being at the chapel. There's a space up top where you sleep, and you know what I'm saying, right? Like there's just
The
like
full
food all the
process.
time.
Yep.
Full process. There's food, and like we're even celebrating in the chapel where we know uncle's at and stuff, singing, dancing and stuff. So anyway, this is a poem about that process. Okay, I don't have a title, but here we go. The body took a moment to catch up. The spirit knew it was home. Eyes locked, souls rooted. Into each other, into the land. Salt water nourishes the barren. Struggles meet, rolling down the cheek, meeting the corner of the flip. Flames flicker, sweetness burns to bitter. Mouths barely break open, truths finally spoken, speaking to the hearts broken, spilling into the ocean, telling stories, souls telling. Generations back and forward, they danced, they laughed, moments suspended in time. One becomes many, all are one. Once fragmented, they collide, they coalesce into shallow streams. They remember, they return, restoration lies at the shore.
Snaps to that. Was that one of the first times you've gone back in a while to the Philippines?
The last time I went was actually with my mom in 2015. So not too long ago. Again, it's the first time actually I met my Lola on my mom's side.
Oh, really?
So it was because like she was 93 at the time, and we thought that she may be passing, and I had my brother and sister knew her, like they met her, and I was the last one, and so I was like, I gotta meet her, like. And then my dad couldn't go, so then I was like, yeah, Mom, I'll let's go see her. We don't know what the future holds, and so that was an opportunity for me to meet the other side of the family.
Yeah. That story, I think you've brought up the phrase a bunch of times where not uncommon, right, but very relevant to our community, these transnational families where crazy. Imagine one out of 10 siblings to be the one to immigrate, and even your experience of being of that the first time meeting your Lola on your mom's side, right? And there's definitely a lot of things there for you personally to like process and come to terms with, but it's also something very common amongst a lot of Filipino families here, right? Where they've been separated because of the need to work, right? Here in the US
Right.
and end up sending money back, right? I wanted to ask, as a coming more from a personal lens, right? You're in these service positions and doing these work, right? And I know that, at least from what I've seen, it can be very heavy and tiring, especially being in service or being in therapeutic role, the role of the therapist,
Mhm.
right? Like, what do you do to maintain yourself being in these service roles all the time?
Yes, very important question. Um, and I would say a lot of it is a work in progress. It's like a moment to moment practice, right? Like it's never, for me at least, like a, a, a formula. Like it's like comes up as I need it. And so when I say that, I'm thinking about like my son because I don't know if you know, but like hugging and
Mm.
laughing, like those are
Mm-hmm.
like uh, serotonin, endorphin generating
Mm-hmm.
sources.
Mm-hmm.
And while that's not exercise or like, what you would think of as like, self care and such. I mean, that's one of my sources is like um, really having that sacredness of family and holding each other. I
Mm.
mean, it's
Mm.
it's as simple as that,
Mm.
And then, of course, you want to ensure that there's other parts of your being that are nourished, and of course, like you know, um, the the walking and being out in nature. This is what's hard though in the pandemic. I'm sorry, it's because that's what I leaned on was like hiking and like doing my walks, but especially with well, one, the pandemic, but then like with the fires, and it's just been tough. But you find other ways to be physically active. For instance, like my son, he likes to do yoga in the morning.
Oh,
um
really?
yeah,
How old is your son?
Cosmic Kids. Okay, any parent out there, I highly recommend this. It's like workout for you and workout for your kid. Like he loves it. Cosmic
Cosmic
Kids.
Kids? That's a
Yeah.
what? That's like an online platform?
YouTube.
Oh, and
YouTube.
then they run your kid through yoga?
Yeah, but they do it in the context of storytelling.
Oh,
So you're like going through these stories, you're, like talking about, I mean, it's like Spider-Man to Moana, like all
really? Oh,
yeah.
I might enjoy that. I want.
Seriously, it's fun.
All
It's
right,
super
let me
fun.
look. Cosmic Kids. Okay.
Yeah. So just staying physically active, I mean, but I would also say like meditation and prayer has been the root of like my resilience and like restoration.
When you say prayer, are you religious? Are you what does that
I,
look like for you?
yeah, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily religious. I'm spiritual. I have personal practices that are not necessarily attached to any religion. But then when I think about, again, this is like I'm still learning. I'm a student in this space of spirituality. I connected to um, Babaylan studies,
Mm-hmm.
and our indigenous ways of healing and connecting to spirit and interconnectivity. I I'm in that process right now of reconnecting to that. But it's always been in me, even since I was like younger. I never felt like I was aligned with Roman Catholicism, and I was always the outsider and saying like, what about this? What about that? And then years forward, realize like, oh, okay, well, my connection to nature and people and spirits, seen and unseen, like that's actually inherent in our culture. So I'm just in that process of
What do you say to people who might not feel that? Or
for
like
what?
for their own, like how would they find that connection to spirit like that? Like I'm asking selfishly, right? Because you have dope dreams, and sometimes I don't have no dream. Like I even have asked like my Lolo to visit me in my dream, but no one comes a knocking, right? And then I'm like, nothing's happening in my dreams. Or I also believe in like some higher power in some way, right?
Mhm.
But I don't feel connected. And like shout out to Ate Marnell, who talks about the
The
whisper of
whispers
the
of the
divine.
divine.
I'm sitting around here, I'm like, where the fuck are these whispers? I don't hear no whispers, but I want to, right? So, what are, from your personal perspective, right? What are
Mhm.
ways to connect with that?
I mean, I feel like it's such an individual thing. I mean, you're going through your process. I was in those moments too. I'm like, fuck, just give me a sign, like something, Didn't get it, and then hella disappointed. But then, you know, um, I think it's just for me. Um, I've always leaned on being connected to my like people who have passed, like my ancestors, right? Like I can honestly say because my Tita Rory that passed away. I mean, she wasn't even actually like blood related, but she was one person who I highly respected, and I could talk to her about anything. And when she passed away, I would always talk to her, and for some reason, I felt like she would answer, and just being open to all of the possibilities of what divine messaging could look like. It could be through a person, through a Instagram post. It could be, like, oh, my shoe fell off on this way. Like, I mean, just like really attuning to the possibilities, and it doesn't always have to look like this voice from the sky that's like talking to you. But um, for me, it's numbers actually too. Um,
Mm,
yeah, numerology. You were talking about that earlier, but that's a whole
interesting.
nother session. I mean,
A whole nother
we have like,
session.
yeah,
Whole
that's
nother session.
it's like
Wow.
we've been talking for hell long, and
Interesting. Okay, okay, okay. Maybe we
yeah.
could have like a focus group session of people who
Hmm.
are a little more connected, and then we can dive
No,
in.
yeah, no, seriously, like there's hella people, I'm not gonna name
No,
them, but within our Kapwa Soul sessions, like that are into numerology. And I have an interesting story about when I went back to the Philippines with my mom
yeah.
about Lolo, because I never knew him, but when they
Okay,
sit
what's the
around the
story? Okay,
table,
okay, okay. What's the story?
you want to know the story? Okay.
You're
So
not just gonna tell me I have an interesting story and then go to the next topic. What's the story?
no, I thought we were gonna save it for the next
No, I
session.
wanna. If you have time, I'm down to hear
I have
this.
time. I'm down. Okay,
I'm down. I
okay.
want to hear the
And
story.
then you could edit whatever. Okay.
Okay, okay, okay.
So, dude, it was so trippy because I didn't know. So like what was that? Like how, like a couple years ago, I never knew when we would go back to the Philippines. It was always on my dad's side, right? We never visited my mom's side. This is the first time I went to Lawag,
Lawag. Where's that? Lawag.
Ilocos.
Oh, what the heck?
Yeah.
I am disappointing my Ilocano side for not
I know.
the
You
fuck?
know, Surat, like
Uh,
that area. You know, it's interesting because like my partner was born 4 miles from where my mom grew up. Isn't that cool? Anyway,
Lawag City. I should know this.
the Wag.
Okay,
Come on
okay,
now,
okay,
bro.
okay, okay. Sorry, sorry. I'm kind of what's this called? Problematic that I'm vegan centric. In the That's the only Ilocos place that I know. Oh, cause you're that's Ilocos Sur, Lawag.
Yeah, the
Oh
Wag.
no, Norte, right? Or is that still
Norte,
in Ilocos Sur? Oh,
Norte.
Norte. Okay, so I'm
Mhm.
Ilocos Sur. That's why.
That's why. You know
That's
what?
why.
And you know
Okay.
what? I'm not saying. Okay, my bad. I'm gonna retract that. You should. It's not like you should know anything.
I should
Okay.
know. I should know. This I always say I'm Ilocano. I'm Ilocano. I should know at least a few other places other than vegan.
No,
Okay.
but that's regionally though, so you didn't know. It's
Okay.
okay.
Okay. Okay.
It's okay.
Continue. First time in
So,
Lawag.
right.
Okay.
And
This was in 2016,
uh,
2015.
20 wait, 2017 cuz Koa was like 1 or something. I remember like yeah. Okay. So, there's nothing like sitting at the table with all the elders, right? You know, especially around the time where either like there's a huge event, like, you know, someone just passed away or they're about to pass away, you know, like everyone's like, you know, remember when that's why we came up with casino talks, because that's like how people figure
Mm-hmm.
out like business wise or like how
Mm-hmm.
to proceed with, you know, planning for X, Y, and Z. And so that's what it was. I was like sitting at the table and they were like storytelling. And then my tita Rose, was talking about because I knew nothing about my lolo, nothing, and they were telling me these stories about like how he was like the village numerologist, like he could by numbers tell where some like you know they would come to him and then like barter, like they would bring him things and to ask for like, hey, can you foresee this, or do you know, like a truth teller, right, or
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
seer, and he did it without any like with humility. He never really charged anyone, but but the funny thing was, so he knew shit right through numbers, basically. Like he could
Mm-hmm.
like throw shit out and like numbers, like, oh yeah, that's there, this is there, whatever, whatever, right? So they lean on him. But then my Tita Rose would talk about like that's why we could never get away with anything because he knew where the fuck we were. Like he would like do his numerology shit and like because you know back then like how are you to know where someone is if they're
Uh-huh.
out and about, like if you're like a youth,
Ain't no
you know,
GPS on their phone.
gallivanting, there's no GPS, there's
Gallivanting.
you know there's no central place or whatever. Like here, like I remember when I would get in trouble, they you know to find me at the arcade, you know, like to go there, but like there was nothing like that, and
Mm-hmm.
he would just always know. Like they couldn't get away with shit, and yeah, there was just a lot of stories around like his gifting, like he just can see things through numbers.
And did you ever meet this Lolo in person? No.
No. Mm-mm.
Mm.
No, no. But then I now or at that point I was like, holy shit, because for so long I have been attached to numbers and messaging. That's why you'll see my like what is it, my email or my Instagram is StephRock333, you know?
Oh, I
333.
never asked why it's 333.
Yeah, I didn't know that was like dating back to high school. I didn't know that 333 was a thing, you
Oh,
know? And
I don't
then,
know. It's a thing. What is it? It's a thing?
but it, yeah, well, so if you look at like the meanings of sequences of numbers in three, like there's certain messaging. If you believe that, you know, I'm not trying to promote that, but just saying like, for instance, 333 is like, okay, you are connected to the divine. Like you are surrounded by your ancestors and loved and guided and such. Yeah.
The only numbers I try to get are these phone numbers, but then it's just changed into Instagram handles. But what's funny is my homie, when we work out, right, he wants to do reps in sevens. I was like, what the fuck? When I said, all right, do 15 reps of this, he's like, I'm gonna do 14. Or like when it's like 15, he's like, I'm gonna do 21. I was like, what are you doing? And then I just went along. I was like, okay, but he's also into the numbers like that. Yeah, it's interesting. I actually want to find something cool in my family. So when we do like these talks, I'm like, hey, was there anybody who's like a babaylan in our family? Was there anybody who's
right?
like a arbolario, right? The one that does healing with the herbs and stuff like that. And then especially like in Ilocos, and they're like, no, we just do business. I'm like, fuck.
Nah,
There's gotta be someone.
they're withholding
Is there
secrets.
and then they're like, did you ever see any manananggal or any of those, like the guy who's around the capre in the mango tree stuff like?
Yes. So that's what I'm saying. Like, and it's just making these connections going back home. Like that was like considered home, right? And wow, like how powerful that was to, like how healing that was to know, like, okay, I'm not just tripping. Like the number thing is not a thing. Like it's actually,
So it's
in
healing
my,
for you
it
to
was
kind
healing
of
for me
see a
to
connection
make the
with.
connection.
Yeah.
My Lolo, whom my mom, never, not necessarily was able to talk so much about, there's some power in making those connections. And that's why I feel like kwentuhan and telling stories and being curious, asking about what's happened along your history, is so important. And why, I mean, if we're going to bring it back to the community center, like that's what we're trying to do, is like create the spaces to be able to do that, to preserve and to remember and restore those moments. Yeah. And so yeah, that was a moment I was like, oh shit, okay, well, I guess I'm not tripping about these numbers. Like I'm obsessed with the numbers. And my mom wanted to be a mathematician and she's a nurse.
She wants to be a mathematician?
I asked her, I was like, hey mom, what did you want to be when you grew up? And she's like, a mathematician. I'm like, what?
Interesting.
And she became a nurse, which is great too. But like,
Yeah, like that.
who
that
wants?
desire.
I don't know anyone who's ever said I want to be a mathematician.
Interesting. I want to make this note though, from my observations, before we close out, right? Coming more to the end now. But what stood out to me from seeing you and Christy do your work, right, for FMHI, was that y'all are very good, and it comes across in this conversation, about making it a community thing, right? Always bringing it, even if you and Christy have taken the lead as the co-chairs and submitting, going through all that process, y'all are very consistent in acknowledging, hey, this is our thing, this is a community thing, there's people that have come before us, and we're building on that. I think that's very important and is very powerful to see. And I'm just saying this as gratitude. Like it's different. And I was also thinking about this. It's kind of different having females and women in the lead versus, I'm making generalizations, of course, right now, right? But versus some other organizations where it might be the traditional man dude who's a little bit more like, da 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 da. I don't know if that's making my point, but da 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 da. Oh, right? Is I don't. It's easier to act it out than explain it. But that's my point, right? Versus yours and Christie's approach is like very la da da da, oh, da da, oh da da, and us, right? Very.
Yeah, dude. Sorry, I can't.
That's a good explanation, right? You see the
It is
difference,
because,
right?
but there's
It's a
no
great
words. It's like,
explanation.
yeah.
Right? You're good with the words. You're good with the written words. And that's how I bring it across, right? We have our strengths.
Yeah.
Right? But you get the point though, right? There's a different way of leadership, and I've been seeing that come across, and I wanted to name that, right? Or act it out, right? in this sense, because it's something very important, and I think it's very, even though you and at the same time also, even if you and Christy also do that, I think it's also important. That's why I reached out to talk to you to highlight the work that the leaders are currently doing, right? That y'all have pushed this, right? And it requires leaders to do the work to push it forward and have the community support to do it, right? I want to ask in a more broad thing, since it's a very contemporary thing right now. Before we close out, what have you learned from this process, right? Of doing the lead up into the proposal, since y'all were already doing these community investigations and stakeholder assessments, and then through actually submitting the proposal, then finally having that fucking day on the 27th of hearing the approve, and then getting it approved. What have you learned through this process?
What have I learned? I mean, quite a few things in terms of like just realizing that it's a vision that has existed years ago. Like, this is something that folks, I mean, not even just through like the focus groups and all that, but I was getting like texts and like DMs from folks when they found out about this, and they're like, dang, oh man, 10 years ago I was wondering why we didn't have this kind of space, and we've been trying to figure out how to da 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 da. And so the beauty of collective consciousness, like we're all, it's all timing. That's what I learned. Like, just to really trust in the timing of things. Like, it may have not worked out 2 years ago, right? And I guess that's where my spirituality comes in. It's just trusting, like, in the process, that there is a time for the things. And a prime example, I would say, is you, Kuya Chris. Like, had I met you 3 years ago, I don't know if this would have necessarily aligned in terms of like the work that you've contributed to FMHI and community, and just really seeing all of this come forward, like, yeah. So from a spiritual lens, timing, divine timing and things.
Divine timing.
The whispers of the divine.
Whispers of the divine.
Says
Like,
Ate Marnell.
and put
Trust
into action. Trust it. Trust
Trust
the
it.
divine.
Trust it. Listen to
Yes.
it.
And
Yeah.
Steph, you trusted the divine when you were trying to play
Nice.
matchmaker on Instagram and you tried to hook me up. But I trusted but also, I had to trust the divine that it wasn't there. The divine spark wasn't there yet. But you trusted on your end the timing of it. I appreciate that.
Okay.
So that's how you actually get on the podcast, by trying to matchmake me with someone. I think that's
And then that's the plug, right? Like, that's really what this is about. This is like divine timing and plugging your.
Hey, so Christian, how do I get on the podcast? Watch this
Well,
episode. Well, let me tell you what
forward.
Steph did.
fast forward to the end and listen to
This
the
little
matchmaking.
section of if you truly understand divine timing, please watch this section.
Hey, but you got some gems and nuggets from that you said, right?
Yes,
So
yes,
you
yes.
have like
I
you
got
have
some
some,
learnings. I got some learnings from that. Cool.
yeah.
The last question I like to ask folks is, on reflection, we didn't get your full trajectory from undergrad to postgrad and all that, but we got a little snippet and we got kind of where you're at right now and what you've contributed, right? If you think back, maybe even think back to that 19-year-old self or the one going through that transition from the transitional housing to a pretty big career change into this expressive arts and mental health and wellness kind of career path. What are three pieces of advice? Three. Oh, number three, 333.
Ay,
Oh,
nako.
ay nako.
So
What are
much
three?
pressure.
What are three pieces of advice that you would give to your younger self? Right? It doesn't have to be fixed in that certain time frame of your life, right?
Okay.
Whether that's young,
Okay.
Sacred Heart prep girl, or older. What are three pieces of advice that you would give to your younger self with the thought that you have certain specific stories, but also very community stories that other people experience. They might be going through similar things as you right now. What are three pieces of advice you would give?
Wow. I feel like I need to do some journaling for like an hour before I answer this. Because I'm like held responsible. But okay, so three pieces of advice. Um, One, you are not alone. You are not alone. And it feels like that on the worst day. And there are people who really love and care for you. So just try to wake up, and reach out, because there's someone out there that can see you. And it might not be the therapist or the counselor, that, yeah. Just kidding. No, actually now, I'm sorry. I want to reframe that because now there's hella folks. And so I would say reach out to your counselor now because there are hella folks. I will say within the Jefferson Union High School District, I will name quite a few who understand and see you. So reach out. Don't underestimate the power of like the support of your teachers also. Someone asks, are you okay? Really answer that. Like, if you're not okay, it's okay not to be okay. I don't know if that's like, so did I just do two? Is that two? That was one.
That was one, right?
One.
That
Okay.
you gave the you're not alone, but with little
You're not
practical
allowed.
steps to
Okay. Yeah.
to
Okay.
reach out.
Okay.
Okay, number two.
Number two, I would say is like if you really do have a dream, to honor that as not just a pipe dream and surround yourself by community and people who can support cultivating that dream. And that it's not always going to look the same way you envision it the first time. You probably have like 50,000 versions of it. And I mean, I didn't know what I wanted or who I wanted to be when I was 19. And I'm 42 now. And I'm just realizing, yay, I'm growing up. I'm grown up, all grown up. And I figured out what I want to do, sort of. Like, it's all good. It's not a race. That's what I'm trying to say. It's like, just follow the crumbs and trust that you have what's within you. And then okay, so then the third thing is like to learn. right? To ask your ancestors living and past, people around you that are smarter than you. Ask them questions and be curious. Like, really find out about your history, because in this talk, I'm just realizing, like, yeah, I mean, if I could have had that opportunity to understand how I was connected to my lolo, or how I was connected to my mom or my auntie in this way, or whatever, that would have made the world of difference of healing. And so ask, talk to your parents, it's scary, sometimes, because we don't talk to our parents, but like, find ways to like be curious with your elders, because they have a lot of wisdom and power in what they've done to lay the foundation for y'all. So that's what I'd say.
Cool. You're not alone. Reach out. 2 is that, what was it? Wait. My memory. I know it. It's just the pressure of speaking on the mic. It's making me forget. But 2, believe in your dream, right? It might not look like it immediately or in the final product, but believe and reach out to people that can support you in the community along that dream. And then 3 is learn, but with an emphasis on the ancestors living and not living, and continue learning about things to see how the connections. Cool. Thank you, Miss Stephanie Balon. Am I saying your last name right?
Balan.
Balon. Okay.
But I like how you say it. It's so much conviction. Balon.
Do you have any last message to folks that may listen or that may want to reach out, things like that?
Yeah. Yes and no. Just more like, if y'all are interested, join us. We're always open to ideas and ways we can support you in your dreams and visions. This is intended to be a space of like a home. That's how I see it. Like, just finding a home for things, centralized home. So
how can people reach out to you?
They can reach out through our Facebook, which Kuya Chris will provide.
Link, yes. Filipino Mental Health Initiative, San Mateo County.
As well as our newly created website that, again, Kuya Chris provided.
fmhismc.weebly.com.
And that's it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, everything's all centralized there, so yeah.
And Steph Rock 333 on IG.
Yes. I know, I'm sorry. And also, I just want to apologize because I'm so long-winded. And
no, that's perfect. That's perfect. Oh my goodness, this went way leaps and bounds above my fears of what a digital version would be, right? And it's definitely good. I was definitely rusty. I could feel in the beginning some of my jokes hit, but I'm very grateful for the divine intervention of laughter from Steph at even some of my corny bad puns in the middle. But that's all about divine timing. Just try it out and you'll get the feedback whether it's good or not. It's a lesson learned. Surround yourself with people who will laugh. That's what I'm doing.
And don't take yourself too seriously.
Yes, don't take yourself too seriously. That is very important. Sometimes I definitely do that.
No, you don't. I'm just kidding.
I don't.
You're the one in moments that break up the oh, this is awkward moment, and you're like, Oh.
Oh, let me say something.
Yeah.
It's borderline awkward, but not really, so it overshadows the previous awkwardness. Interesting. That is my divine whisper. Oh, maybe that's when I do get the divine whispers and I just speak it into jokes. And it oh,
Comedian.
comedian.
I
Where
told
is he? Dito, he's Jan, comedian. Oh.
Dito.
Dito,
Dito na lang.
comedito? Is he a
Dito.
comedito or a comedian? Oh,
Hindi ko alam.
divine intervention. I believe in it. Oh, ancestrally, I've had a lot of jokers in my family. Maybe that's the thing, right? It's community well-being that we participate in through laughter and brevity. Wait, is
Yes.
brevity the right word? Is that correct? I don't know. I think brevity is like
I'm not your autocorrect. I don't
levity.
really-
Levity. One of those rhymes. Oh, fuck. Well, thank you for being a guest. Next one we definitely have to get on is Christy Morales Kumasawa.
Yes,
And then we can have a
My
breakdown.
work wife.
Your work wife. That is what
Yeah.
you have introduced her to me ever since day one. Your work wifey. Awesome. Thank you very much, Steph, for coming
Oh,
on
it's been
and
a
sharing.
pleasure. So much
Woo.
fun. Woohoo.
Okay, let me end the recording. Perfect. Thank you,
There.
Steph.
There.
Recording. Yeah, so this is continuation, part 1.5. You wanted to actually add on to our discussion about how you got into community organizing, and very relevant right now because we just started Filipino American History Month. So
Yes.
could you
Yeah.
give me a little bit more context to add on to that conversation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you for like allowing me this space because I felt like last time we talked, I glazed over the question, and I have a tendency to do that where I minimize, the process and the journey, and I just felt like it was important to give space and honoring like what really happened. Like how did I get to this point to be a quote unquote community organizer? And even in that within that in itself, just to be named a community organizer, it's like, what does that mean? You know? And that was really the start of my journey, was like trying to understand my relationship to community, because ever since I was little, I had an affinity. I knew I wanted, especially in high school, I knew I wanted to be being of service to community. What that looked like, I didn't know. Fast forward to my 30, so 2009. Wait, how old am I?
Wait. Question though.
What's
When you
up?
say that in high school you had that affinity, why do you think you had that affinity? Were your parents like active in church, or were they like
Yes.
doing service things? Like, how did that affinity be planted in you?
The seed, yeah. What was the seed? I think it was a combination of what you just mentioned. Was like my parents were really involved in the community. Whether you consider it superficial or not, or when I look back, but they always wanted to give back in whatever way. My mom, for instance, she was diagnosed with cancer when I was 8 and when I was 16. And she connected to the American Cancer Society, and we had gotten involved in like the walks, the making strides against breast cancer walks and raising money. And so she really got so much out of the volunteer work to give back to those who helped her when she was in her process of healing. And so I guess I just witnessed that, and then even in the church, we were super involved in those fundraisers and drives and such, and service, um, serving food to folks that were underserved. So I was exposed early, and then I also was attending a school that the principles and values were based on service. So I went to Sacred Heart Cathedral Preparatory in San Francisco, and that's in the heart of the Tenderloin. And so a lot of our work, like volunteering, because we were required to do, service, was in our local area. And so I was exposed at an early age to, the realities of injustices and homelessness and things like that. And it spoke to me. And I also had gone to an immersion trip to Mexico my senior year of high school, where only a few are selected to go. It's based on your spiritual values, your connection to service, and your goals and what you want to do in community. And I think that was a life-changing experience, because I was taken out of my comfort zone of middle class like environment. I didn't have to worry about clothes, food, nothing like that. And then going into communities in Mexico where they were not afforded that. And so this trip was really about, it's called Ven a Ver. It means come and see. And so it's like to explore your spirituality through the eyes of the people. And that in serving those communities, we were also challenged to think about what do you want to do then, now that the realities of this world, of people who are not afforded the things that you are. What are you going to do? How are you going to pay it forward? So it wasn't just like, okay, you're exposed to these communities, but it's like very action oriented. And that's what I loved about that program. And that was I would say the moment where I was like, okay, I want to dedicate my life to service. And again, I didn't know what that meant. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it is. And then so it does. So, and before I asked you that, you were continuing into once you got into college, like what the transition looks like in terms of now going into the service work?
Into college. Do you want to know all of that?
Well, whatever you want to share in terms of like, how did it become then like a part of the story of how you got into like community organizing? Because I remember when we last talked, there was that talk about the transition from that nonprofit when you were doing the homeless, right? Like the housing for homeless folks. And then that's when you went into your arts therapy after, right? But what was missing from that story about that you wanted to expand on in terms of like getting into community organizing?
I think, well, as you're saying that, I think, there's a couple of things. It's like, there's a spiritual path. And then there's also this yearning to understand my cultural identity. And and that's what that experience was in high school, was more spirituality based. And then moving into college and, my first professional experiences was more about community and understanding culture and such. And so especially in college. I had been exposed. My major was in sociology, but then I took all the ethnic studies classes. And I wonder now in hindsight, like why I didn't change my major because I did better in I did better in ethnic studies than I did in my sociology classes, it seems. But then it was a game changer because I learned about my history. Fred Cordova in Seattle, fans, like, he was my professor.
Oh, really?
And
Fred Cordova was your professor?
yes,
Dope.
yeah. And Connie So, her class, who I already knew her class would be hella hard. Everyone talked about it. Like, she was hardcore. Like, I'm gonna tell you how our real narrative looks like and this is APIA back then, Asian Pacific APIA. Yeah. Asian Pacific Islander American history. And it just blew my mind because I'm like, this is not the history I knew growing up, like, elementary school and such. And I was angry. I was mad. I felt like bamboozled, all the things. And I didn't even know what to do with that information emotionally. And but I channeled it. I mean, I figured out, like, I knew, and then it gave me some sense of direction. Like, I knew I wanted to explore it more. I knew I wanted to be in that realm of cultural identity, especially because my brother, he was a mentor to me, passed away in 2013. Like, that's what his work was rooted in. And he was 9 years older than me. Dr. Danielo Balan. Yeah.
That's a dope name, Danielo.
That's my son's name. We named him after my brother.
Wait, what? So his name is Koa Danielo?
Makoa Danielo Balan Molina.
Oh, that's cool. That's a good name.
Yeah, strong name.
Makoa.
Yes, Makoa. So, yeah, I mean, I was exposed to different things in terms of cultural identity and community service. And just, I think in general, the way I've followed this path is like following the breadcrumbs. I never really had a hard, like, timeline. I'm going to learn this and this and this about my, what I want to do with my life. But I kind of I was an opportunist. And like, as things came up, then I was like exploring them. And that's what happened after college. Like, I thought I wanted to go into ethnic studies and explore that more. But then when I returned, because I went to the University of Washington in Seattle, and when I came back to the Bay Area, I had to get a job. And it was around September 11 too. I don't know, like, around that time, it was a hard time, 9/11. And I found this position to be a program coordinator for a homeless shelter. And that was also part of my heart work. When I was in high school, that's what service was about. We were in this, entrenched in this community. Here we are, privileged, high school students, and then placed in a community that's underserved, underrepresented, under-resourced, right? And so it's just grappling with that, tugged at my heart, and like we need to do something about this. There's just a clear disparity of resources. And so when this position came up, I was like, yeah, like, I mean, why not? Let's just it's aligned with my values. And so it was a lot of ground up work, like from working, because I worked with them for like a decade. And if we're talking about like, how did I come to community organizing? I never even imagined that I would say in high school, I want to do community organizing. It kind of evolved into this space because I was afforded opportunities through my work. For instance, and I'm most notable, because fast forward, so 2001 is when I started with the agency, but then 2009, is when I started with, or I was offered this opportunity with the, I think I mentioned to you last time, the Next Generation Leaders of Color
Mm-hmm.
Institute. And it offered, it's through Compass Point, and it offered an array of services in terms of understanding your role, leadership role as a person of color in human services, health and human services. And that was like the game changer, because I got like mentoring from folks that helped me envision that I could be doing work more invested into my community, who I connected to my identity as a Filipina American, right? And that's when I figured out my transition plan to go into mental health work, or the mental health field, mostly devoted into the Filipinx community. And then here's the other thing, so spirituality, right? Remember I mentioned spirituality and like how that's been my leading light through the course of my journey. At the time, I had also reconnected, or wanted to heal, because I had been going through depression and anxiety in college, and addiction, because of childhood trauma and growing up with a sick parent. Like my mom, she had cancer, and witnessing her go through that whole process was really difficult. So I went through a depression, anxiety, starting from high school up until my mid-20s. And so I needed therapy. I knew I needed therapy, especially exploring now through this program, the Next Generation Leaders of Color. I was trying to understand these concepts of internalized oppression and systemic oppression, the language around what I was experiencing in my work was really difficult, because I was tokenized. I was the only young woman of color amongst middle-aged white men in middle management. So if you can imagine what that was like in the early 2000s, like my voice was minimized on every level. And with this program, it helped me realize, like, okay, I don't necessarily have to be in this space anymore. I can like invest my skills and my passion into my community. So that's when the plan happened. And then it's like this, once I opened up to therapy and listening to my coach and my peers in this cohort, it's almost like law of attraction. Like all these opportunities started coming forward. My therapist was a Panay, elder Panay, and she said, "Oh, have you heard of the Filipino Mental Health Initiative?" And that's, I think, what hooked that. That I think was what started it. It's like my going into therapy. I didn't imagine that I would find an organization that spoke to what I needed in terms of healing.
Interesting.
Yeah. Did you have a question?
I kind of have like a observation in the sense that your trajectory came through like the professional career progression, where like shifts within that field brought you back to the community in a way, like through that empowered people of color. Was it women in color or just
next generation leaders of color? Mm-hmm.
Cool. So with that kind of that awareness of like, okay, I can be a leader within my community, and also having that kind of institutional support or professional development support for you to see that, right? Because I think it's interesting to me because I've noticed the other way around, kind of, where there are people who are coming into the space from like an activism perspective, and then or some grassroots organization, and then trying to see on the reverse how they can apply it in a professional career sense, right? And what's interesting is that you have a trajectory that's kind of, you entered the service work from more of a professional side, but then like in that first spot you were talking about where it was dominated by older white professionals, not really feeling at home there, then transitioning and then finding it through the empowered leaders
Next generation leaders
my
of color.
memory is so bad. Yeah,
It's all
that.
good. No, you're
And
good at
then
paraphrasing, though.
going
Yeah.
into even therapy, and then finding those who are within your community. Like you said, you had a Pinay therapist, right? What from that kind of experience? It's cool. It's interesting. What would you say you have in terms of reflections for other people out of that? Whether that's advice or just thoughts for other people to ponder.
I think, just tracking the journey of this whole thing, I feel like it's just really trusting your intuition and your knowingness of like your heart work, if you know that, or if you have a sense of that, like that pull to follow it. I think that's what led me. And I don't know what that's attributed, whether it's, the seed from my parents or, my ancestral wisdom that was like playing out, my spirit guides. I mean, whatever you want to name it, there was definitely something that was divine in this process for me that I was listening to. Oh, the divine whispers. That we talked about before, but just trusting in the process that like when what may not seem like what you envision, like you have this idea of what you want to be, and what you're doing now may not relate, but it does. It totally like I feel like almost well, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, that every step of the way, as much as it felt distance from my vision of what I'd hoped to be doing, was all transferable skills. It was all skill building. It's all things that I could use. I mean, I was working within a system that was working against me, right? Or against the people I hope to serve. And yet I still gained some hard skills about tracking outcomes, deliverables, the things that you need when you're doing community organizing, to have the data. Like, unfortunately, this is how the world works. To get the money, you got to have stats, you got to have data, you got to have proof that what you're doing is working. And so I learned that in a system that wasn't in service of me and my community and my allies who are underserved. And yet I still found some value to the experience, even though I wasn't completely aligned with it. So it's like a both and experience, and to be open to that it's not going to be like, I am going to be so aligned with this, agency. And, as you're going into your career, like, I mean, I'm in my 40s. I'm still trying to figure it out. So like, to be patient and gentle and compassionate with yourself, that like, trust that these steps and these opportunities might be something that can offer some resources to the next step to what you ultimately want to do, if you know what that is, though, right? What
And
I
then
mean,
you're just you're really emphasizing that listening to your hard work and also what we've been calling the whisper of the divine in
mhm.
terms of like guiding and then applying that to even your professional development or career and
Yeah,
trajectory there.
yeah.
And
I mean, because I would. Oh
go, go, go.
no, because I would say that like once I did that, once I was more open to talking about my personal mission, which I was able to figure out through that Next Generation Leaders of Color uh, Institute. You know, like the mentoring. I mean, and that's all the one thing too is just like find your mentors.
Mm,
You know
mm,
that can guide you and be a sounding board and tell you what you don't want to hear sometimes. You know,
mm, mm,
um,
mm.
and be okay with that. To be that mirror for you, because once I did that, I opened up, more opportunities came. I was more creative about like what I wanted to do in terms of connecting to my community. You know, to be with my Filipinx community. I had friends who were organizers with like the what is it? We don't have it anymore, but it was the Sister City Film Food and Art Festival back in the day. It was like 2010. Daly City, Quezon City. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but like, yeah, my one of my friends within my circle, she's like, hey, you know, I know that this is something that interests you. You know, do you want to be one of the organizers? And that's when I started getting into community organizing with the Filipinx community. Is like when I was like, hey, so what are you doing? Being curious, you know, like, and then yeah, so
Cool. Like that's interesting. Let me a little backtrack a little bit about speaking on what you want to do, right? Because I have this little interesting life experiment I'm testing out in terms of an observation that sometimes, and I have a friend that kind of thinks along those same lines that if you kind of talk about what you're doing or your goal a little bit too much, energy dissipates from it, and you get the little dopamine
dopamine.
hits, dopamine, not dopa-kind, dopamine, those dopamine hits where like you tell somebody, oh, this is my goal, and then they're like, oh, that's a dope goal, and you get that little dopamine hit, and so, but then because you get approval that, oh, that's a good goal, then you're not
Mm-hmm.
as driven or to do it, or energy dissipates from it. Because my other friend, he keeps everything just hidden until it's released,
It's
right?
ready.
Till it's
Yeah,
ready.
yeah.
But so, and I've noticed that for myself too, right? Like if I talk about some stuff like a little too much, it kind of dissipates. And like for example, last year when I did my music album, I didn't talk about it until it was all done, right? And time to release. But on the flip side, this is why my Libra in me little balance. I've also seen the benefits that you're talking about of sharing like your mission, what you want to do. Because even recently, even if I'm on the job hunt, I'm talking about like social impact jobs that I want to get. And I've had people hitting me up like, hey, check this job out, emailing me some advice or some openings and messaging me on that. And you see that community support in a way, right? It's an interesting thing to think about of how much you talk about something, like, right?
Sure.
but
Yeah.
but also the energy that could be dissipated if that's a thing. But kind of on the same line of what you were saying about when you share it with the right people, maybe it's the decision of who you share it with. You get that mentorship or that guidance or that mirror, right, that you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah. No, you bring up such a good, like, an important. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out that concept of taking the risk of who you choose to share this information with,
Mm,
right? Because this is, I mean, who really can be how do you know if that person's aligned with your personal mission, your hard work, right? And then the risk taking is hard, because if you have a history of um, having a hard time with rejection, that's hard. And I will speak to that. Like you know, I think that has a lot to do with colonial mentality too. Like just feeling less than, or like not deserving of, and I don't deserve to be at the table, or maybe I don't. Maybe I shouldn't share with them, because is that worthy enough for them to hear this? You know, like for what they do. You know what I mean? Like there's just so many self-defeating thoughts that can come with sharing your vision. And I don't have a hard and fast rule about any of it, because it's like, you know, if that person feels like they don't want to share with it, you know, they want to keep it closed, you know, if that's what works for them, you know, then yeah, try it. I feel I can only speak to my own personal experience of like when I have shared that it's like almost like attracts like. There's been just this unveiling of opportunities and natural alignment and organic like relationship building. I mean, you are a perfect example of that. I mean, we, you know, there were, and timing is everything, or for me, I'll say it again, like, you know, but yeah, it's a tricky thing because, yeah, I've had experiences where I've shared my passion about, you know, wanting to do the social enterprise cafe, and then they're like, whoa. It's either like, whoa, that's so exciting and it's great. And you get the approval, like that dopamine kick. And then there's others where it's like, oh, okay. How are you gonna do it? Well, you know, I think it's important to, like, at least for me, what I gather from that is like experiencing the range of experience of reactions and responses, and then gauging yourself, because it's not really about them, it's more about you, right? Like about how you choose to step forward in that power of your vision. You know, I mean, those are just insights from other people, but ultimately, you know, you can choose to take it in or take it on. You know, you can take it in, but you don't have to take it on, right? So
that's a good point about the importance of even those people who are like, so how are you gonna do it? That's actually important too, rather than just the rah like dopamine hits, right?
No,
those are important.
And I yes, like you need the haters too. You need the people who are gonna be like, you're not gonna do that. I seen someone try to do that. No, whatever. You know, you need that too, because the truth of the matter is you're not going to satisfy everyone's palate, right? And when I do my meditation, when I have to bring myself back down, I like ground myself in the idea of like, why am I doing this? Where is it coming from? Is it from an intention of love, you know, community, kapwa, you know, all that? That's all I can lean on, really. And if I, you know, fumble, I fumble. But those are also learning opportunities. Those are all teachers, people who are haters, people who, you know, will ask you hard questions, and you need those. I would say that's another, like, I don't know if you want to call it advice, but like surround yourself by people who know hella more than you. Because that's how you learn, you know. It's great to be feeling that hoorah, you know, get that, you know, validation. But if you can find a combination of people who are smarter than you, I don't want to say smarter, but at a different level, because it's not a competition. It's not like either or, but like folks who have different level of knowledge and also are like hoorah, you know, like yes, you know. How could you not succeed? I mean, I just feel like you surround yourself by those kind of people.
I like the term of a supportive push or a supportive challenge. Those supportive challengers where you know that they're in it in terms of your mission, but they also want to see it excel through those challenging questions, right? And I think that's very important in terms of like developing ideas, especially like practical challenges, whether it's just the business side, right,
Yes.
of
Oh,
things,
yeah,
right? Like, okay, how
definitely.
are you going to scale that? How are you going to sustain that?
Mm-hmm.
What's the profit margins on that if we're talking about a social enterprise
Mm-hmm.
with financial um,
Mm-hmm.
requirements, right? So
Of course.
those are definitely important. Uh, like I can think about it, the people that I talk to that I trust. It's interesting that you said that, and that's good in terms of a perspective. Like, it's important to have that range of responses because
Mm-hmm.
then you're able to kind of prepare. And what you were saying, I like. There's this quote. A lot of people say it right is don't be the smartest one in the room,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
because that means there's no growth left
Right.
around those
Mm-hmm.
people, and it's good to be around people that push you, challenge you, and inspire you to be
Mm-hmm.
better and almost like a healthy competition too. I like that aspect, right? Like not that
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely destructive competition, but there's
Mm-hmm.
also really healthy competition in the sense that you're inspired by another person, like, dang, they're doing that,
Mm-hmm.
and like let
Mm-hmm.
me do that, and how, and get advice from them, but
Yeah.
realize that because they've done it too, there's a possibility that you can do it too, right?
Yeah. The humility around that, right? Like just coming in with a beginner's mind. I
Mm,
mean, um, I'm not. You're in martial arts, yeah.
yeah.
Like, yeah. So you understand the like the stages of change or learning,
Mm-hmm.
right? Of like beginner's mind, master's mind, and it's like you can. I think we all have the capacity to learn a skill, but the art of it of like maintaining a beginner's mind, is really challenging once you've mastered something or you feel like you mastered it, right? Like whether
Mm,
you were talking about like when you're in the room with you feel like you're the smartest person in the room. I mean, like, what does that really, where does that go, but
mm,
if you can come in with a beginner's mind and foster that continuous growth. I mean, it's a win-win situation for everyone because there's leaders, and that's the thing. Like, especially I would say with FMHI, I feel a sense of shared leadership.
mm.
That like everyone's coming in with their different like competencies of leadership and domains and what's one of our value of like I don't know everything, but together we do, right? And so just leading with that is for me as I'm because I'm going through that process right now of just okay, yeah, we secured the funding for the social enterprise and all that stuff. Like, great, now what? Like
Mm-hmm.
there there's still so much room for growth in terms of all of our leadership and moving it forward. And um, yeah.
Uh, Jumping off that conversation and then kind of putting it into context, to start closing off, but putting into context that we are in the beginning phases, right? I think we talked about it in the last little session about the social enterprise cultural center, and then the fact that we're in Filipino American History Month now. What is like kind of a closing call to action that you have for folks who might listen to this, or call to action to think about or to do? Um, Kind of taking into and processing what we've talked about of your personal story, but also the story of FMHI getting this funding and the whole gamut of community organizing we've gotten to, or even also listening to like the whisper of the divine, listening to the community in that sense. What's a little reflection call to action that you have?
Well, considering that we have so much to celebrate in terms of the richness of our history, Filipino, Filipina, Filipinx, American history, just reflecting on, their journey, like our leaders, our activists, trailblazers. Uh, in the, I have seen that self-reflection has been. It's not necessarily like being an activist doesn't necessarily mean you got to be being out at the front lines all the time, but like really understanding your why. I would say, um, if you choose this path of being an activist, in the community, and there's different levels of that too. So just considering that, like, you don't being an activist, like, define that for yourself, because everyone has a role in it. I mean, there's ideas of what we envision an activist to look like, on the extreme end of it, and then there are other roles that are just as important. So just to reflect on that, understand the value of what you can bring to community. If that's caregiving, if that's just focusing on school, if that's loving, like, unconditionally, that's activism, I'd say. I mean, so just, like, I guess for yourself, define what activism is.
How do you define it, taking into account that it is Filipino American History Month and the theme is activism? So, what does activism mean to you?
I would say it's along the lines of what I just mentioned, is that activism doesn't necessarily need to look like movement, but stillness. Just really being solid in your values and sense of identity, purpose. I think that's where it starts. So, and that's what I'm still learning, because I'm in a different phase of my definition of activism, because I've been struggling with, like, I wish I could be out on the front lines, like protesting and there's just different life things happening for me. I mean, I have a little one that I take care of. I'm a mama, and sometimes that's not always an opportunity, but I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm just speaking to, like, I don't necessarily have the capacity to do a lot of things that other folks can do in a stronger way. But I do know that I have a place, and if I focus and understand the why around that, then that's activism to me. Just how are we, like, it's more about asking questions to yourself, like, what does Filipinx American activism look like? Can you define that for yourself? So I can't say I have the answer to it, but that's what leads me, is just like this constant exploration, and especially around decolonization, my decolonial healing journey is really important, of understanding, like, how we can break the cycles of oppression, and so
it's really understanding the why, not the X or the Z, but the why. Cool. Thank you for sharing. Is there any last things you would like to add before we close off this 1.5 session?
No, I just want to appreciate, you, of course, for allowing us the opportunity to speak to the, to, or for me to speak to my story, and be vulnerable. And also just want to offer, like, don't be afraid to share your story, and yeah, contact Kuya Chris for that.
Oh, that's a good little marketing snippet I can cut up.
Don't be afraid.
Cool. Thank you for coming on. I'll be posting up all the contact information because I think we talked about that in the last session as well. This podcast has been sponsored by Kuya Coffee. Shout out to Steph for giving coffee to her parents. Little Barako. I still have work to do in winning them over. Like you said, though, right? A while ago, you can't please everyone's palates. But me being in the food and beverage industry, yes, I can, baby. I'll please that palate. I'll find the way.
I'm sure you will.
I know. Half joke,
Well,
half truth. That's
I was gonna say, yeah. Truth is somewhere in the middle.
Truth
so.
is somewhere there in the middle. Supportive challenge. All comes applying all the lessons we talk about.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let me stop.
So yeah,
recording.
we love you.
Thank
I love
you. Love you too.